female finance collective where we encourage women to have open and honest conversations about all things money.
We're kicking off an exciting series all about money mistakes. That's right. We're going to talk about failing forward today. And with the area of our money, I know money and mistakes may not feel like a good combination, but we all make them. And we're going to get vulnerable with you and share some of our biggest money mistakes today. So before we get started sharing our stories, I just wanted to share a little bit about failing forward. So, failing forward is a conceptual idea of reframing your mistake and actually making it a learning opportunity. That doesn't mean we don't need to feel our mistakes, because we do. We absolutely need to feel the badness, feel the guilt, whatever. But then we need to let that go and think, what could I learn from this mistake so I don't make another similar mistake in the future? And actually, what happens when we reframe our mistakes that way is our brain actually learns from them better. We actually learn better when we make a mistake and then correct or think about that mistake. So when we're sharing our mistakes today, you'll probably be thinking of your mistakes as well. And we want you doing that. At the end of this podcast episode, we're going to share an action item with you so you can do some work beyond our show today. So let's go ahead and get started. What mistakes have we made?
Hey, thank you, Sybil. I will go first. I'm Mary Lee. And even though I am a financial coach and I've been a financial professional for 25 years, I have made so many money mistakes. I could probably fill the entire hour with just a handful of them. And most of my money mistakes have a really common theme, and it is around purchases that are purely for consumption and they don't have a lot of value after a period of time. So it really started in my early 20s. I was a broke student. It was a struggle for me to afford rent, tuition, all the lifestyle expenses that I had. And I decided to buy a computer. So this was back in the mid 90s, and computers, like high-end computers, were really, really expensive. I bought way outside of my budget. I paid a lot of interest on that computer, and it was not the best purchase that I made. It really didn't do a lot, to help my life, to help my studies. And when I compare that to the computers of today, it was just so glitchy. It never worked. And I sat with this feeling of regret of paying for this purchase for years. And I was lucky to be able to buy a house, right out of finishing school. And the next big purchases were in my home. I loved home decor and I would scope out expensive furniture. And again, these purchases were huge compared to my income and to my budget. And they were all purchases where, I might pay $2,000 for that couch, but if you try to turn around and sell that couch, it's, worth a few $100s. And um, I used to get really regretful about these decisions because I really was living paycheck to paycheck. I've always been a bit of a saver, so I was doing certain things right. And that's one of the things is we can make mistakes in certain areas of our finances and be doing things really well in other areas. So I always took advantage of my company match for my retirement savings. So that is something I did from day one with working. So gold star for that. But I definitely was hyper focused on what I could buy next. And that just continued as my career progressed and I made more money. I started to look at some designer goods and bought a few very expensive purses. And one or two of them I love, one or two of them just weren't the best fit for me. And what I've learned in this process is the key thing is to just ask yourself some questions before you make purchases, especially when they are expensive and if they are purchases that don't have a lot of value, even a few months after you've made that purchase. So I am going to now move it to Jen, and she's going to share about her money mistake.
So while I was listening to you, Mary Lee, all I kept thinking was, oh my gosh, I've made so many extra mistakes. They all just came like flooding back. And I'm like, now I was all prepared with which money mistake to share. And then I was like, whoa, wait, I just thought of like 27 more. Um, Many of them in my 20s, as you shared. It's like we feel like we're growing up and we're like finally getting a real paycheck and we should be able to like do things like a grown up, but we're financially not ready for any of that, right? And so I'll stick with my original mistake, which was all about my credit card debt. I was a young teacher. I was single, so there's no extra income. I was making hardly any money. I think my gross income when I started teaching was like $23,000, maybe less. So my take home was not enough to cover like my student loans and going out with friends because I was 20, all these things just were there. And I did not know how to manage any of that. And so I just accumulated credit card debt. And unlike you, I was not making huge purchases. So I think that's how I was justifying my spending to myself a little bit. I think I was like, well, I should be able to go out to dinner with my friends. I should be able to go out to eat. And I'm not making enough money. So I was just like using my credit card for the things I felt like I should be able to afford, even though I couldn't. And then, so that was obviously a mistake. One, many, all wrapped up into one. I'm sure you just heard like seven wrapped into a little bundle. And then I think what the next biggest mistake I made was not asking for any help figuring out what to do with that. I was absolutely overwhelmed by my credit card debt from the get-go because I was like, oh no, now I have a payment I have to make. So even if I was making the minimum payment, that was still pulling money out of the monthly income that wasn't enough. At least I didn't know how to manage what I had if it didn't feel like enough. And I remember at one point I did very early on have a family member. Somehow I must have said that I had a credit card and that like freaked them out. So they offered to pay that off for me and then I could pay them back, which at the time seemed great. And I took them up on that offer. But in retrospect, all that still, I still had a monthly payment. I still had to pay them back. So it didn't really bail me out in any way, shape, or form. It just like took that off my credit card balance, right? So I asked no questions. I didn't say, great, thanks for helping me with that. Now, can you help me figure out how to make a budget? Like, now, can you figure out how to help me not spend so much? Like, I didn't know how to do any of it. And like you, I was putting money into my retirement account because everybody had told me that was like the important thing to do. But that's the only sort of saving I was doing. And I didn't know how to budget anything. And so in case of emergency or in case you need groceries or in case you want to go out with your friends, you just swipe the credit card. Like that's how I was living. And so I have so many regrets about that. And Sybil, you talked about failing forward. And it took me a really lot of years to feel like I could move forward from that because it took me so long to get out of that situation. It felt just like a ginormous fail that impacted me along the way. So it was, I mean, I think that is like my biggest regret is not like asking anyone for help, not figuring out how to like move forward from that. Um, I don't know if any of you experienced that same sort of thing, but ugh.
Jen, that just got me thinking because for us, social media wasn't as big of an influence. And now I'm thinking of the people in their 20s now where making a purchase is so easy. You know, you double click your phone, there's no effort. You have constant like temptations coming at you with social media that I feel like it's even harder to navigate those extra purchases.
Yeah.
And mine were big, but the little ones can add up to just as much money. And I don't know if you guys have seen this trend. It's called loud budgeting, where you announce to your friends that, hey, I can't do this right now because it doesn't fit with my budget, or, however that looks.
Mhm.
Because I struggled with that in my 20s. I wanted to do everything. And I actually lost a friendship over it because instead of being able to loudly say, I don't have the money, I would do the last minute bail. And that obviously didn't do well for the friendship. So I wish these conversations were around back then.
I love that idea of loud budgeting because that's what it all comes down to. We feel like everybody else is doing it. And so we want to do it too, right? And maybe a lot of people are doing it and maybe not, but it's like what an awesome like way to start talking about money, because that's what we really need to do, right? To build our financial literacy. We just need to have these conversations. And that's exactly why we started this podcast, is to have those conversations with each other and with you. So I love that idea. Another little tip I've heard that I've tried out a few times and it's really worked well is if you're a shopper like on Amazon or any online shopping, like you said, Marilee, it's so easy. It's like tap pay. Oh my gosh, you don't even have to have your wallet anymore, right? We all have our phones. But to put stuff in your cart and don't purchase it. Don't let yourself purchase it right away, but let it sit for 72 hours. Most of the time, you will have gotten the dopamine hit that you wanted by putting it in your cart. And then you don't end up feeling in 72 hours that you actually need that thing if you're budget conscious and paying attention and doing this kind of thing. So that's a little tip. That have either of you tried anything like that out to give yourself the satisfaction, but then not going through with the purchase?
I usually do that. Like, I have a list of the purchases I am giving myself permission to make. And then anything that just pops up. So if I'm on Amazon and they suggest something for me, those are the ones where I either do like a 24 or 48-hour pause. And I just ask myself lots of questions like, do I need this? Do I need this right now? Is this purchase because something else is going on? Like, am I hungry? Am I frustrated? Am I tired? Am I feeling too happy, too sad? Because my overspending came from like the gamut of emotions. Like every single emotion was really an opportunity to buy something. And I tend to be an overthinker. So planning out purchases and figuring out what I would like next was like a big thing that I spent my time on. So I do find like having the strategies to take a pause are really, really helpful. Because usually our brain's on to something else and we realize we didn't really need that. A lot of the satisfaction comes from making the purchase and then initially getting the item, but after a while, that purchase doesn't really bring you a lot of joy.
I've done it with in-person shopping. So if I'm like, sometimes if I see something and I absolutely love it and I know that I can comfortably afford it, I will just buy it. But if I'm like kind of on the fence about it, I will leave the shop. And if I'm still thinking about it before I go home, or if I get home and I'm still thinking about it, then I will give myself permission like the next day to go back and get it. Or if I'm like at a mall or whatever later that day, go back and get it. But oftentimes I find that I totally have forgotten about it. And it'll be like hours later, and I'll get home and I'll be like, oh yeah, I was supposed to be deciding if I wanted that sweater. Well, guess I didn't really need it or want it because I totally forgot about it, right? So I've tried to be better about, if it's not an instant like, oh my gosh, I absolutely love this. I need it or whatever. I mean, I have a whole, we could do a whole 72 episodes on wants versus needs. Um, but I have found that like giving myself time, just making myself walk away. And if it's still in my mind, then that must mean that it would be worth my money.
Yeah, and the same, there's research about upgrading, like upgrading your phone, upgrading your computer, that you think it's going to make you happy, but it doesn't make you happier. It's like such a short-term lived thing, but we feel like we need the new phone. I mean, they do that intentionally, right? Marketing does that, and the people around us all have the new phone. But the research says it doesn't make you happier even to upgrade either, just like we're talking about shopping here. Really, what makes you happier is experiences and relationships and doing things with people, right? And having those experiences. Yeah, awesome. So I can share my money mistake now. It's not on the in the end of spending as much as I, like Jen, was a young teacher and I didn't know anything about money. Grew up in a pretty frugal home, but so that's good. So I had some of those values. But other than that, I really didn't know much about money. I expected that I was just gonna be a teacher, live a simple little life, and didn't really need to know a lot about money. But so in comes a financial advisor to my school lounge, and he is there to set us up with some investment plans for our retirement. So I did that. I did his little survey and started investing just a little bit of money into a retirement account. I was a part-time teacher for 6 years at that point when I was raising my kids. So it was very little, but I felt like it was the right thing to do, and it was absolutely the right thing to do. But years later, I went to roll that money over and I realized I hadn't watched it or done anything with it. It hadn't grown at all. And I was like, okay, I guess I was maybe a little conservative. I don't know, maybe just retirements, that's the way it's supposed to go. I still really wasn't financially literate at this point. Rolled it over to an IRA because somebody told me that's what I should do. Um, and let it sit there. And then went on to teach in Shanghai and was around people who were talking about money and ways to build wealth. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, um, it can use the stock market to build retirement accounts up. And so I started, investing in a brokerage account and getting financially literate. And it wasn't still for years later that I looked at that account and I was like, oh, I guess IRAs just don't grow. And all of a sudden, I don't even know, it might have been you, Jen, something that you said to me that made me realize and ask a question. And that was, can an IRA grow like my brokerage account stocks are growing? Or does it just sit there and it has tax benefits, And all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, I needed to have put that money in that container of the IRA into index funds like I was doing over my brokerage account or into some kind of into the stock market. And so I just was like, oh my gosh, I just lost out on so much money for so many years. And, every once in a while, I've had to feel it. I still am like mad at myself. And then I remind myself, you know what? Like I did the best I could. I'm glad that I have that money. It's now invested in the stock market. It's now making more money. And it is what it is. I didn't know at the time. And everything we're talking about here is that we just didn't know, or we didn't ask the questions, or we were just watching and following what other people were doing without like digging deeper, right?
Yeah. And that is so common. I've seen so many clients where they take the first step, they make that retirement contribution, and the second step doesn't get done, which is actually investing the money. And that's where the growth part comes from. So, kind of the big tip there is to go and check to see what your accounts are actually invested in, because it might surprise you if they're in cash or something that is almost like cash.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely true.
And I think it's okay. This is off topic, but something Mary Lee just said. I never used to check my account, my retirement account. I just like let it sit there because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. But now I check them all the time. Now I'm like, oh, how much money do I have? And I am really conscious not to like freak out if it's going down or like get too out of control if it's going way up. But I just think it's good to know. And that kind of lines up with what we're talking about, these mistakes. Like we didn't know, so we didn't ask, we didn't look at anything, we just like floated along like, well, I guess it's too embarrassing to ask or too embarrassing to find out. But like it's our money, right? We should know what's happening with it. We should not be afraid to ask questions. And I think that's a big part of it. I just thought people are going to think I'm so stupid. Like everybody should know all of this already. And I didn't know any of it. Same with you, Sybil. Like my mom was
Yeah.
super frugal and really good with the small amount of money she had. But I guess she just I love my mom so much. I think she just assumed I was like absorbing the knowledge like through her actions because I got older and I'm like, well, how was she doing all of this? I never asked.
Yeah, my mom was always into budgeting. So she would look at her numbers regularly. So I got that habit from her. But she was also like ultra conservative with retirement savings, with not wanting to take risk to like find a job that paid more. So that really set the foundation for me to feel like money was this thing that you preserve at all costs instead of look at ways to grow it and really make your life easier down the road. So it's interesting, you learn from your parents and you learn from their habits. And I think the key is like where you say about failing forward is to take that and to figure out what works for you and to continue to learn and to talk to those people that might be a few steps ahead of you,
Mhm.
because that's where the growth really happens. Because we do get very used to the way that we are comfortable with managing money. And to grow and evolve, you sometimes need to learn some new skills and new information.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to spend like at least 60 minutes a week just thinking, talking, doing something with money. And Jen, I'm like you. I do look at my investment accounts. I do like to conceptualize my numbers. Um, and I think that helps me, but there is a cautionary piece in there, right? Because some people do sell when it's going down, for example. So you have to like remove it emotionally, um and almost like try to run your money life as a business, right? So you can take some risks and know that you're going to make some mistakes, but if you stay ultra conservative, you're kind of passing up a lot of possible wealth, right? And I keep telling myself, like, we're thinking about making an investment in a property in the next 5 years, and it's going to feel risky, and that's okay, because like you said, Marilee, with risk, you can build wealth, but it's calculated risk. I'm asking tons of questions. We're trying, we want to do it in the right location. We want to be able to rent it out afterwards. But you do need to take on some of that risk. And I really regret not taking on that risk when I was 20 something. I'm not going to use this money until I'm over 65. But I wasn't thinking about that because I wasn't spending 60 minutes a week thinking, talking, reading about money. Right. And so it really comes down to just building your financial literacy. I love the idea of like somebody a couple steps in front of you. That's like perfect. Right. And then asking them those questions. What'd you do? How'd you do it? And then that leads you to somewhere else, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of like, well, I think through this podcast, what we want to do is like model for women and encourage women to feel comfortable and get comfortable talking about money. Ask your friends, like, say, hey, I'm struggling with this, like with my monthly budget, I'm creating credit card debt. Do you have any tips on how to fix this? And like have these conversations because I think that once we start talking about something, then it's not as scary and then it's easier to keep moving forward. And taking those, I mean, the risks in money are one thing, but also the risks in like putting yourself out there and like asking and getting help. And I think it's absolutely worth it. Once I started to get more comfortable talking about it and like Googling stuff I didn't know, I was like, everyone's using this word and I don't know what it means. So I just Googled it. Like just the other day, somebody said something and I was like, I don't know that term. So I read about it. And I just think getting it like out on the table and getting more comfortable talking about it, that is going to help so much. Not only fix our mistakes, but like prevent them moving forward.
I
Yeah.
think one of the things I realize is we will continue to make money mistakes. That is the reality because we are in our life in the moment. And once you reach that next life stage, you're going to look back. It's natural to look back and say, oh, I wish I had done these three things instead. But, because I've been a financial planner, I have the beauty of seeing how people progress through their life stages but most people can't see that. So a lot of these things aren't really mistakes. It's just what happens in that particular life stage. So for many of us, we start our 20s and the first financial thing we get introduced to is that credit card. And so we often have a similar path in terms of how our finances unfold. And it's very natural as you start to get closer to 40, you're starting to think about, I'm in the midpoint of my career. What do I do to be able to retire? So that becomes a bigger pull than it does earlier in your life. So keep learning and making mistakes, and realizing that they're just opportunities to grow. And it does happen to every person. Like every person makes financial mistakes.
Absolutely. And we need to feel it and then we need to let it go the best we can, right? Like we don't need to live with guilt or shame. Of course, it's easy to look back and be like, I should have, right? I shouldn't have sold that house. I should have invested more aggressively. We're all going to do that. That's natural and easy. And like, let's feel it. Let's let it go and then reframe it. Like what can I learn from this? So I make sure that I don't make this mistake again, or that I make a better decision over here, right? And so we've put together a workbook for this month for you guys. And some of the things we're going to have you think about is how to let go of that shame, that guilt. What can you do to, maybe it's just writing it out, to let it go and move on, move forward. What patterns do you see in the mistakes you make? In my book, Burn Bright, Not Out, 35 Lessons That Cultivate Teacher Wellbeing, I talk about making a failure chart. And so you write your failures on one side, and on the other side, you write what you learned from it. And if you put it up on your wall and it's public, it like debunks the idea of mistakes being bad, right? And then you can look for those patterns. Oh my gosh, I'm always making this kind of mistake. And it's because it's last minute and I don't pay the bill till the last minute, so I can't call, whatever it is, right? But it's a fun little strategy to do because then you can kind of look for those patterns. We also want you to think about like what money mistakes have you made so far? Maybe you can jot those down, do some thinking about it, and then reframe it. What can I learn from this mistake? Who can I talk to about this mistake? What questions might I ask based on this mistake? So it's been a great episode of talking about our biggest money mistakes, and we will come back next week to talk some more.
We'd love it if you followed our podcast. We're super friendly. And if you have any questions or if you'd like us to interview you on our podcast, please do reach out.